There are many evils throughout D&D. Devils, demons, classic tales of horror, things that kill and things that terrify. Though none as terrifyingly human as Strahd Von Zarovich, known simply as the Devil Strahd. Strahd Von Zarovich was a vampire of great power in D&D, and the Dark Lord of the Valley of Barovia, one of the domains of dread, located in a remote corner of the Shadowfell. I am the Ancient, I am the Land. My beginnings are lost in the darkness of the past. I am not dead, nor am I alive. I am undead forever. Strahd was one of the first villains in all of D&D to be fully fleshed out and a complex character, with a tragic story ending in heartbreak. In Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the Ravenloft module paints Strahd as a prince and a conqueror. He conquers the lands of Barovia. He spends his whole youth, up until his middle ages, being a conqueror, finally gaining what he set his sights on, the Valley of Barovia. I was the warrior. I was good and just. I thundered across the land like the wrath of a just god. But the war years and the killing years wore down my soul as the wind wears stone into sand. Strahd spent his entire youth with a singular goal in mind, conquering and domination, and he was good. Though one day, he finally took a look at himself and found that he had squandered his youth and all of his strength. While his army was settled in the recently conquered Valley of Barovia, he longed for family, and he called them to his new home in Castle Ravenloft. Strahd hated his brother Sergei, who was handsome and youthful, a man in the prime years that Strahd had missed. Strahd cared for not much after his warring. Even his family did not bring him joy. But there was one, a citizen of Barovia, a rare beauty called Tatiana. Strahd quickly fell in love with her, but she was already in love with his brother Sergei. She would call him things like Old One, Elder, and Brother, and Strahd did nothing to break off the engagement that was set. When she looked at Strahd, she saw death in him. This death that Tatiana saw in Strahd enraged Strahd, and so he too began to hate death, his own death in its coming. He did not want to become what others saw in him. So he made a pact with death, a pact of blood. On the day of the wedding, he killed his brother Sergei, and the pact was sealed with his own brother's blood. Strahd found Tatiana weeping. Strahd could not explain himself. He could not be allowed a moment to explain what had happened to Tatiana and express his love. He needed to tell her of the pact that he made for her. Strahd chased her across the castle, and finally, in despair, she flung herself from the walls of Ravenloft. Strahd watched everything he wanted fall from his grasp forever. And when Strahd was at his lowest, his castle guards looked to him and fired arrows, piercing his soul. But he did not die, and he did not live. He became undead. He never saw Tatiana's body, and he searched for it 1,000 feet through the mists, but no trace was ever found. Now Strahd fears nothing, not even death, though he often hunts for Tatiana, who he believes to still be out there in some form. And so he resides in Ravenloft, alone among the dead, so that none may disturb him. And for the rest of the world, it's probably for the best. And so Strahd's tragic backstory is set up very well in 1st edition, in the module Ravenloft. He rules the land of Barovia and lets none leave. And the Barovians believe that the devil Strahd is a curse placed over the land, because of some forgotten sin of their ancestors. Strahd gets greatly expanded on in 2nd edition, when Vinrichten himself finds the Memoirs of the Devil Strahd. The memoirs deal with more of Strahd's past. It shows just how cunning and powerful and cruel Strahd was as a youth. He lived his whole life up until the point that he claimed Barovia in fear of losing what he was accomplishing, in fear of losing battles, and in fear of losing his life. In the Memoirs of Strahd, he spends much of the time worrying about the Balverzi, a group of assassins renowned across the land, and there are rumors brought to him by the closest thing that he could call a friend, Alec Gwillem, that the assassins are after Strahd. Through Strahd's perspective, we can see just how highly he thinks of himself, But during the novel, he is not the Strahd that we see later on. He is still just a man, and he makes many mistakes on the way to Barovia. Finally, like first edition, Strahd does call his family as he's been missing them. His father, King Barov, dies before he can make it. And even though Strahd named Ravenloft in his mother's honor, she was afraid of him and unappeased by the castle name. And finally, the worst of all, his brother Sergei, who had nothing but love for his older brother Strahd. But when their mother died, Strahd's envy turned to hate. And when Sergei introduced his betrothed, a native Barovian named Tatiana, Strahd instantly desired her and grew to hate his own brother even more. And his final piece of envy turned to absolute hatred for his brother Sergei. Strahd searches out for these dark powers and makes a pact with them for immortality. And the dark powers give him a vision of Tatiana falling in love with him, so he goes through all of their instructions. And Strahd's first victim, the first part of the pact with the dark powers, is murdering and killing his best friend Alec Gwillem and drinking his blood. During the wedding of Sergei and Tatiana, Strahd has already begun falling into the devil Strahd, and he flies into a rage and kills Sergei, though he still hopes to make amends with Tatiana and chases her through the castle, determined to make her accept and love him. Strahd finds Tatiana grieving on an overlook and tries to console her. He begins to confess his feelings for her. Tatiana is almost consoled by Strahd until he attempts to turn a grieving hug into a kiss. Tatiana pulls away, confused, even more upset. The last person she could grieve with, the brother of her love, is not the man who she thought he was. And Tatiana hurls herself off the overlook. After the last thing that mattered to Strahd in the entire world is destroyed, he turns to meet an assassination plot, one that has been boiling since the beginning of his story, and he is shot dead by his treacherous guards. Or so they thought. For as they brought Strahd into the chamber to live out his final moments, he recovered from his wounds. With Strahd's newfound strength, he slaughters the rest of the guards and escapes easily, taking back over the castle Ravenloft with his newfound invincibility and immortality. Strahd killed his brother Sergei, his best friend Alec Gwillem, and lost everyone loyal to him in the assault on the castle, led by traitors who opposed Strahd's rule. And so that brings us to Strahd today, a hateful vampire with nothing left, clinging on to the final thoughts and hope that Tatiana may be alive, for he did not himself witness the death, just like in first edition. He continues ruling in Barovia. Strahd's kingdom was whisked away to the domains of the Dread as part of the deal he made, and Strahd became an immortal ruler, haunted by untouchable reincarnations of Tatiana. And although Strahd is a ruler who rules over his Barovian subjects in Castle Ravenloft, he is not the lord he is perceived to be. He is a prisoner as much as his subjects are. Strahd cannot leave Barovia, and if he is killed in any way, the dark powers will simply resurrect him. Strahd made a hasty and desperate pact with the dark powers, and now they have shackled him to the domains of dread, and he is taunted endlessly by reincarnations of the one thing in his life he valued, Tatiana. 5th edition details even more of Strahd's tragic backstory, and shows a bit more why he was so jealous of his brother Sergei, including the fact that even though Strahd very desperately wished for his mother and father's approval, he was never able to claim his father's due to his untimely death. And as for his mother, she preferred Sergei, the son who stayed away from the battlefield, the son unsullied by war, and so he received the love and attention. And in 5th edition, this story is not told from the perspective of Strahd, so we see the event of Tatiana's death much differently. After Strahd murdered Sergei and drank his blood to seal the evil pact between Strahd and the Dark Powers, he chased Tatiana through the gardens, determined to make her accept and love him. Tatiana did not hurl herself from the balcony due to grief of her lost husband, but instead to escape Strahd. And in 5th edition, it is not so coordinated a plan to get rid of Strahd, but instead, castle guards, seizing this opportunity to be rid of Strahd forever, shot him with arrows, and Strahd slaughtered them. And so he has destroyed his family bloodline and doomed all of Barovia. The castle again was whisked away and locked in its own demiplane, surrounded on all sides by deadly fog. And for Strahd and his people alike, there would be no escape. And so Strahd continues like this, hunting down the reincarnation of Tatiana, and always failing. His subjects living in misery under the reign of Strahd, unable to escape the deadly mists of Barovia. Strahd is never meant to get what he wants. The pact that he made had doomed himself and all of his subjects. Though the land of Barovia is not completely locked out, you could be an unlucky adventurer and wander in, perhaps by invitation or by circumstance. If you are, the devil Strahd will not hesitate to have his fun toying with you in an inescapable land of death and misery, the embodiment of Strahd Von Zarovich.